your life.
Pranav, have we ensured the spam message has reached all the class groups with the
Yes,
link?
yeah, correct.
All right then. If it's okay, we can start at 4:05. 4:05 works for everyone.
Yeah.
All
Yeah, we
right.
can.
All right. Fine. All right. Hello and a warm afternoon to everyone present here. We, the batch of 2023, are here to present the most awaited talk of the academic year, the OLT, or the One Last Time series. One Last Time, or OLT, is a continued legacy passed down every year, where we have the outgoing batch share their nuggets of wisdom on the journey towards their planning and preparation for pursuing their higher education in India and abroad. This year, we have an elite panel of speakers who have secured phenomenal admits from renowned institutions. And in today's session, we'll cover up the speakers from the fields of CS, IT, EC, and EEE, and it is my privilege to introduce them today. We have Vishal, who will be pursuing his MS in Computer Science from the University of Florida. We have Siddharth, who will be pursuing his PhD in Electrical Engineering from the University of Colorado Boulder. We have Aditya, who will pursue his MSc in Robotics in the University of Bristol. We have Shreyas, who will be pursuing his MS in Electrical Engineering from Columbia University. We have Rahul, who will pursue his PhD in Computer Engineering from North Carolina State University. And finally, we have Anirudh, who will pursue his Master's in Electrical and Computer Engineering from Georgia Tech. Before we begin, there are a few important points that we'll be covering in today's session. So, the next slide, please. In today's session, we'll be covering on four important points which highlight the crux of every applicant. And in these points, we'll be asking what exactly do each points have in meaning. The first point is the university shortlisting. This point is a very important point when you begin your application because that actually streamlines your process into which universities you plan on applying and in which programs you plan on applying. Application timeline is another important factor and that decides how exactly should you be planning your applications and in which university should you be applying first. Components in an application involve five important points. Statement of purposes or SOP, which is the highlight document in your entire application that describes your entire portfolio in a nutshell. Letters of recommendation or LORs, which are generally recommended by your professors that you have worked with and who give their idea or their perception of your work and your talent. Transcripts, which generally include your academic transcripts. CV or a curriculum vitae, which is generally a brief introduction about yourself and the project and the experiences that you have worked in. And then finally, we have and and then finally we have the standardized tests, which is the GREs or the GMATs or whatever test that we have. And that finally leads to the last point, which is profile building, which sums up all the points that we have mentioned earlier. As we move ahead, the first person that we'd like to introduce today is Vishal Prakash. Vishal, it is my honor to introduce you today, and I would like you to take over the session.
Thank you, Rehan. Hello, guys. I'm Vishal Prakash, and firstly, let me tell you all about myself. So, I just completed my bachelor's in electrical and electronics engineering at NIT KS Roorkee this year, and I also have a minor in computer science engineering. And I'll be joining the University of Florida for my MS in computer science program this fall. As you all can see, my areas of interest are in machine learning and full stack software engineering. And in my master's, I'll be doing a specialization in the domain of machine learning. Regarding industrial experience, I worked for 2 months as a web development intern in a company called Upsaram Technologies in the summer of 2022. And I have applied to a total of 11 universities and have received admits from 3 universities, namely University of Florida, Arizona State University, and University of Pittsburgh. And I'll be joining the University of Florida, as I mentioned. Okay. Now let's talk about how to shortlist colleges and what programs to choose. So the first thing we have to do before when we think about pursuing a master's or PhD is what course do I want to do masters in, and why do I need to do masters in this course? So to understand this better, you can just go to different colleges' website. Let's start with reputed colleges. Go to their website and go to your department and see which all courses are offered as in the master's program. And once you click on them, you'll find the detailed course curriculum, which will give you a list of all courses you'll be learning and whether it's going to be a thesis-based course or you have a non-thesis option with internships and so on. The other thing you have to look for is the professors who are working in the universities and what kind of research they are doing, which topic they are specialized in, and how can they help me in my master's program. And in case you're pursuing it with a thesis option, you'll be working under a particular professor. You have to choose your professor uh, before you think about the other aspects in the college you uh, want to go to. And finally, the placement, wherein you check about which all companies come here during the placement season, or for internship or full-time employment. And next point, if you're someone like me who's shifting his branch from one branch to another, in my case from electrical to computer science, do look for course prerequisites in the college website, in the department website, and see which are the necessary courses that you should have completed in your bachelor's. Let us say in computer science, there are few courses like data structures and algorithms, database systems, and operating systems, and so on. So make sure that you have completed all these courses, or at least most of the courses, because some colleges are a little liberal and they offer help in the form of allowing you to take the a few pre-required courses in the first 2 semesters of your college that you can be doing. And for most people, this is a completely new topic, application to masters. It's nothing like our undergraduate applications, where when we just go to the website and then choose colleges in the order of interest to join, and then it's done. It's a year long process, starting from creating statements of purpose, and then all the way to getting your visa, and then flying to your desired country, US in my case. So it becomes overwhelming, and then students generally tend to get very tensed looking at the huge amount of work in front of them. So you if you're someone like that, you can take help from different counselors. They offer various services, ranging from reviewing shortlisting colleges for you, reviewing your SOPs, and all the way till giving you mock visa interviews and so on. Also, they also help you in uh, PhD interviews as well. So you can look for counselors. And in my case, I took help from IDP consultancy, and they were pretty helpful. The biggest advantage of having a counselor is they take away the burden from your head, but it is you who has to do all the work. If you just want to just be completely dependent on the counselor, there are chances that you'll fail to get an admit. They might just know a bit about you, but you are the one who has to take the final decision, as in, am I eligible for this college? So make sure to do your homework along with the help of what the counselor offers. And when you're applying to universities, do apply to at least some 7 to 8 universities. And if you're someone who's shifting branches, at least apply to 10 universities, because there's a high chance of rejection in this case, because they're not sure if you're competent enough. Many universities are not sure if you're competent enough to be doing your masters in a different field. And while you're shortlisting universities, do it in 3 segments. One is the ambitious universities, wherein your chances of getting in is something like 20 to, I mean, 0 to 20%. And the next segment comes moderate universities, wherein your chances are 50% or lower. And next comes the safe universities, wherein you can be 90% sure that you're going to get an admit in this university. And do like apply 20% to ambitious, something in this range, and 50 to 60% in the moderate range, and then 20 to 30% of your application should go to safe universities. Safe universities is a must, because you'll never know if you can get into the moderate or ambitious. So if you as someone who didn't sit for the placements season and then don't have a job in hand, you'll and you don't get admit in any college, it's like 1 year is wasted for you. Moving on. So to apply to any college, they generally ask you to take up two standardized tests, which are GRE and which tests your maths and verbal and writing proficiency, and the other one is TOEFL or IELTS. Let us start with GRE. So GRE is a test which has three sections, namely verbal, quants, and analytical writing assessment. And in each section, you'll have the verbal section will be for uh, uh, pardon. So you'll have three different sections: the verbal, quants, and analytical writing assessment. And other speakers will be covering this in detail. And I have shared a few uh, resources from which I took help from, which are the Magoosh vocabulary app, which helps us to learn new words. It has about 1,000 uh, frequently occurring GRE words, which you can take help from and uh, learn your vocabulary. And I also took up this online Magoosh portal, which provides you with recorded videos for the different topics which you have to prepare for GRE, and also gives you a pool of nearly 2,000 questions which you can practice from. The good thing about this Magoosh portal is that gives an analysis of your uh, performance, as in which segment are you strong, which topic you have to work more. And the other thing is that it offers unlimited full-time tests, which comes in handy uh, for your GRE prep. The more tests you take, the more prepared you will be for the final test, which happens in one go. Moving on, we have the IELTS exam, which tests your proficiency in English, and it has four sections, namely speaking, reading, writing, and listening. Uh, the one unique aspect of this exam compared to TOEFL is that the speaking test will be conducted on a separate day, and it will be conducted by a person, an interviewer. Whereas in the TOEFL exam, you'll be talking to a computer which will record your answer and then you will be graded. So this IELTS compared to GRE is a much easier exam, and it hardly requires 7 to 10 days of preparation. It just checks your basics in English in all the four sections as I mentioned before. So all you have to do is once you book your IELTS exam, you'll get a test prep booklet from the official IELTS board, which is IDP in India. If you just practice that, you'll be more than ready. Or if you want more help, you can buy the Leap Scholar Fast Track course. It is just about 50 rupees. You can find it online. So you can take that, and that'll help you boost your performance. Moving on. So this is the most important slide here. So here we talk about how, I mean, if you're shifting branches, how do you build a profile for it? Or can anyone just apply to a master's in a different field? Firstly, you should have a clear idea of what you want to do in your profession and why you want to do masters in that particular field and how it will help you. In my case, I am going from electrical to computer science. I just can't say I like computer science and hence I want to do this. I have to give them a clear picture of why I like computer science and why I don't want to go ahead with electrical and electronics, and how will computer science help me in my profession later on in my career. So you should have a clear idea, and you have to implement that in your SOP. So your introduction itself should give at least a glimpse of your interest in the domain. That should catch the attention of the reader, the one who is checking your SOP. And the entire SOP should revolve around this one point: why you want to pursue masters in this domain. Why do you want to switch from your branch to the branch that you want to pursue? So in my case, I can say things like I want to do masters in computer science because I had taken up a few courses, but I felt that there was a lack of more information. I also did a few projects, but I felt that I needed to know more in this subject. So hence, I want to do a masters in this subject. So make sure you have a valid and strong point that uh, convinces the reader that you're eligible for this program. Next, we have to make sure that we have some relevant experience in this domain. So you can get that by doing projects and clubs or under professors, and also doing online courses in portals like Udemy and Coursera. And the most importantly, as I previously mentioned, make sure you satisfy all the prerequisites of the program. If not, your application will directly be rejected. And even when you go for internships, let us say you're from a mechanical you're doing mechanical engineering in your undergrad, and you have an internship in something related to mechanical, but you want to go for computer science. If such is the case, they'll straight up reject your profile, because they don't see any interest in this domain, and they don't see any experience in this particular field. They might think that you'll probably fail being a student in this domain, and you might not be able to catch up. So make sure you tailor your career towards what you want to apply for. Otherwise, don't go for the masters in this domain. And as I told you already, you have the reader to convince, the one who checks your SOP in the university. He should be 100% convinced that you are an eligible candidate, and you'll ultimately be completing your masters in flying colors. Moving on. Next slide, please. So that was about it from my side. And thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, please ask or put it in the chat box.
Yeah, we'll be taking any questions that's available. Please feel free to use the chat box so that we can pass in your queries. All right. If there isn't any questions, Vishal, any last piece of advice from your end that you'd like to give before we head to the next speaker?
Yeah, if yeah, I would recommend most of you to go for masters, because ultimately in your career, if you just do bachelor's, there's a high chance that after 5 to 7 years your career stagnates. It's not the case with everyone, but this is what I heard from a lot of corporates and people in the domain of computer science, at least. So if you get a chance, try to go for masters as soon as you finish your bachelor's, or if you want to work for a couple of years, don't think twice about going for masters after that. It will definitely help you. And with that, I would like to conclude my talk.
All right, Vishal, that was brilliant. Moving on, I'd like to introduce Anirudh. Anirudh, please take over.
Hey, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Anirudh. I'm from the 2023 batch of the EC department at NITK, and I'm an incoming MS EC student at Georgia Tech in Atlanta. This is my experience with grad school applications. So yeah, let's just get cooking. So this is my profile. Ever since my second year, I've been interested in digital design, computer architecture, VLSI design, and recently hardware for machine learning. And I'll be continuing in this field itself. And my MS in specific will be in electrical and computer engineering. My CGPA at the time of applying was 9.24, and the two main internships on my resume were the ones at Intel in Bangalore, where I worked on hardware for the Ethernet protocol for internet, and the University of Bremen in Germany, where I went through the DARDWISE program, and I worked on quantum computing. These are my internship in Germany was not very closely related with my MS field, but since it was a very good experience in research, I included in bold in my CV. And during campus placements, I was also placed at NXP Semiconductors in Bangalore. So what was my university shortlist and admits like? So as Vishal mentioned, I categorized my list into three parts: ambitious, which is in red, a moderate, which is in yellow, and safe, which is in green. And all my admits have been underlined. Um, it was quite difficult to choose between Georgia Tech, University of Michigan, and UCSD. So why did I choose Georgia Tech? So I would say there are three main reasons: rank, research, and coursework. Georgia Tech is ranked fifth in the US for ECE, which is really good, only beaten out by like very elite schools like MIT and Berkeley. The research that is going on in Georgia Tech in my fields of interest, especially hardware for machine learning, is really great, and that really interested me when I was going through their website. And also the coursework is also really great for equipping me with better knowledge for my career. Another very important decision was cost, and Georgia Tech is significantly more affordable than Michigan and UCSD. And with all those factors together, I decided to go for Georgia Tech. And why did I choose to do MS now? Firstly, my end goal was to have a career in the semiconductor industry, and more specifically chip design. And having a degree from an internationally recognized institute like Georgia Tech will definitely better my prospects in this industry in the future. Secondly, EC in the US is at the cutting edge. They're doing some very interesting research, like I mentioned before. And working under professors who are doing this will definitely equip me with some advanced knowledge, which will help me later on in my career. And thirdly, I feel, in my personal opinion, leaving a job once you've settled in is very difficult. You'll be probably in your home city, you'll be getting a very nice salary, and you'll be very settled. And I feel to leave that for education again is quite an ordeal. So I decided to finish my education in one go and then go for a job. Next slide, please. So now that I've explained my profile, let's go about when you should do this. When in the upcoming application seasons should you go about the entire process? So like Rehan mentioned, there are many components to your application. And let me just explain a recommended timeline that you should go with so that you can comfortably submit your applications. So most university deadlines are around December 15th in your 7th semester. And this can vary, obviously. Some universities can have towards the end of November. Some universities can have it in January. So just look through your prospective university sites to get an idea of when their deadlines are. So I would say the first component in your application that you should get finished with is your GRE and TOEFL or IELTS. I would recommend you guys to write this as soon as possible. I myself wrote it in my 6th semester. The reason I'm recommending you to write this in your 3rd year is because in your 7th semester, apart from coursework, you'll also have to start with applications. So finishing with your GRE and TOEFL in your 7th semester really takes a huge load off. If you don't, I would recommend you finish GRE and TOEFL by August or September at the latest, because in the off chance you get a score that is not to your satisfaction, you'll have to take another attempt, which is again a time consuming procedure. When booking a slot for GRE or TOEFL, you might not get a slot immediately. You might have to wait for a month, 1.5 months. So at latest, finish it by August or September. And you can take your TOEFL or IELTS after GRE. As Vishal mentioned, TOEFL and IELTS are very easy. Once you've gone through the English for GRE, TOEFL is a breeze and you don't need to prepare much. After that, I would say researching about your programs and universities and shortlisting them would be next. So you can start this around August, and this would consist of going through university websites, noting their deadline, seeing the coursework that they have, what research their professors are doing, and making a broad list, and then sort of filtering through that list later on as you go. And there is no hard and fast rule that you have to have your application, your university shortlist finalized by this date or so. I even changed my university decisions in December. So as long as university deadlines are open and you know what application materials they require, you can change it. And as Vishal mentioned, keep a good mix of ambitious, moderate, and safe universities. If you're applying to 10, I would say 3, 4, 3 is a good mix. But yeah, definitely keep some safe universities. The third component I would recommend would be to get your LOR sorted. So LOR is a letter of recommendation that a person gives on behalf of you that recounts your experiences with them and vouches for your skills. So I'll go more into detail about this, but ask your potential recommenders, such as professors or managers, by September, and send requests for these LORs by September or October, and give them as much time as possible to upload these documents. Fourthly, your statement of purpose, which is one of the most important parts of your application. I would say start this by September or even earlier if possible. This will take multiple iterations, maybe 2 or even 3 months. And the criteria is that you have to be satisfied with your SOP, which might take quite a bit of time. Finally, to compile everything and submit it in your application, you can decide this based on when the deadlines are. But for some programs which have rolling admissions, you must, I would recommend you to submit your application as soon as possible, because in the system of rolling admissions, as soon as an application is completed, the admissions committee looks at your profile, and they find it satisfactory, they'll give you an admit. Compared to non-rolling admissions, where they gather the entire pile and then rank you based on your profile, rolling admissions, you really benefit by submitting your application faster. So that is the application timeline. Coming to the next slide, let's go deeper into the statement of purpose. Our senior named Chandravaran actually did a very in-depth discussion about this in his video called the SOP Talk. It's up on the IEEE NITK YouTube channel. You can go watch that. My job is done. Bye-bye. But seriously, I'll just cover a few general tips that you can keep in mind while writing your SOP. Obviously, as I mentioned before, start as soon as possible and take 2 to 3 months for revisions. And every time you revise your SOP, get it reviewed by maybe 2 to 3 seniors in the same field or the same degree that you're applying. There'll be a lot of seniors in EC, EEE, and MEC that will be doing the exact same degree that you want to do. So definitely contact them, contact me. We're always ready to help, and we'll be giving you like paragraph by paragraph feedback on what to change, what to make better, what to remove, which is a very important part of the process, because we've already gone through this before, and we have the know-how of how to do this, and it'll really benefit in making your profile shine. Also, stay technical. Don't use fancy words and phrases. This introduces a lot of noise that the admissions committee doesn't really want. They want to know about you. So make sure that every single sentence in your SOP has a meaning and has a purpose. Also, grammatical errors and spelling mistakes obviously make a huge impact in your SOP. Use Grammarly Premium, that's free with your NITK Edu account, to proofread your essay. Professors will not take nicely to these errors, which can be easily avoided. So those are some general tips. Coming to the structure, I would say the first paragraph is very, very important. It's key in grabbing the reader's attention. There are many different ways to start the first paragraph. You can start with, say, a question, saying what this field um, can become in the future. What can I contribute to this field? This sort of piques the curiosity of the admissions committee, and you can use the experiences in your academic career and other points as an answer to this question, so that your entire SOP will be linked to the first paragraph. Also, clearly state your research interests. This is very important in knowing, in conveying to the admissions committee that you want to do this. And also, including relevant projects are very, very important. Like Vishal said, you need to somehow evidence the fact that you are interested in these fields. You need to back up that you have some skills to succeed in this field. So that is also very important. And very importantly, very important, do not include childhood experiences as motivations to pursue this degree. So a lot of people, it's very common in SOPs and in first drafts of even very good SOPs, that people say, oh, I was interested in computers in my 5th standard, so now I want to pursue an MS in computer engineering. That is not very relevant. You need to include technical details of why you are interested and why you will succeed in this. So that is a big no-no. And once you have a sort of rough draft, most of these paragraphs will carry over to almost all of your applications. So this will be your reasons to apply for an MS, and why you will succeed in this, what projects you have done in this field. But the last few paragraphs can be tailored for each university. Say, I want to do XXXYYY course in this university. I'm interested in working with Professor Z, who's doing some very interesting research in my field of interest. And you can also propose some ideas based on whatever you've done, saying, I worked on this. Professor is doing a somewhat related topic, so I can use my knowledge to complement whatever the professor is doing in this work. So that is also a very important part of your statement of purpose. Next slide, please. Coming to your letter of recommendation, like I mentioned before, it is a letter given by someone on your behalf, which recounts your experience with them, vouches for your skills, your background, technical knowledge. So usually, US universities require 3 LORs per application, or that means 3 different people have to submit a letter of recommendation for you. But there is no hard and fast rule. Some universities might have LORs optional. Some universities might have 2 LORs. Some universities might not have at all. So when you're shortlisting universities, just go through their program requirements and check what they need. Also, very important, your recommender must upload on your behalf. So once you ask them for an LOR, they will upload on the portal after you send them a request. They won't send it to you, and you can't upload it to the university portal. So this is a sort of matter of integrity. So you won't be able to sort of tweak with your LORs. So who to get these LORs from? Generally, you can get it from anyone you have worked under. So, say profs in your department, or internship mentors if you've done an internship in another college, or if you've done an internship at a company, you can get it from managers over there. But here's the important difference. There are 2 types of LORs. You have an academic and a professional. So an academic LOR comes from a professor, and a professional LOR comes from a manager. And for most MS programs, which are usually research heavy, they prefer academic LORs. So try to get around 2 academic and 1 professional LOR. So to get these LORs, it's important to keep a good relationship with all your potential recommenders. After you finish a course or an internship, a project, anything, make sure to keep in contact with all your recommenders and let them know that, okay, in the future, I might be asking you for an LOR. Definitely build rapport with them so that when the time comes, they know who you are, they know what work you've done, and they can give you a good recommendation. And for this to happen, it's important to talk to your recommenders well in advance. So if the deadline is in December, I would recommend contacting your recommenders as early as September. This is important for two reasons. First, they'll sort of give you a general idea of how strong their LOR will be. They'll straight up say, okay, I'm going to give you an average LOR because you haven't done that much work under me, or I'll give you a very strong LOR because I really liked your work. Strong LORs increase your chances of admission. And another thing is professors will give only a set number of LORs. So if I'm applying to say 10 universities and I go to one of my department professors and tell him that I'm applying to 10 universities, can you give me LORs for these? He'll say, no, I will give you LORs, but I'll give you only for 5. So because you're applying to 10 universities, you will probably need 30 LORs. Uh, because one professor is giving only 5, and if you have two other professors who are giving you 10, you will need one more recommender to fill in that other 5. So make sure that you fulfill all of your LOR numbers so that you don't fall short at the last moment. So what I would recommend is to make an Excel sheet of all your universities, make a short list, um, uh, put 3 columns LOR 1, 2, 3, and allot each of these LORs based on strength, and make sure each university has the required number of LORs. And applications for MS and PhD programs usually open in the month of September, and I would recommend you to send the request for the LOR as soon as applications open, and give your recommenders as much time as possible for them to upload at their own sweet time. Um, so once you enter the contact details of the professor on the university portal, you will also have to enter their email. Once you send the request on the university portal, the professor or manager, whoever you're getting the LOR from, will get a link on their email to upload the LOR, and they will upload personally. And when they do upload the LOR, make sure that the institute stamp and their sign is on the LOR to make sure it's genuine. So yeah, that was LORs. Next slide, please. So yeah, that was me. Any questions?
Yeah, we'll pick some questions that were asked in the chat. One of the questions that was asked is what CGPA is ideal for masters? It should not be completely ideal, but what is acceptable in the eyes of a college applicant committee?
Okay. So again, it depends on the tier of universities you're applying to. For ambitious universities, it'll have to be as high as possible, maybe 9, 9.5 if you're trying to apply for the MITs, the Stanfords, the Berkeleys. Your CGPA will have to be as high as possible. For other lower but still great universities, I would say the recommended would be 9. Um, Acceptable would be around 8.5. But again, it depends on the tier of university you're applying to. So yeah, in short, maybe around 8.5, and ideal would be 9 plus.
I
All
would
right,
like
fine.
to add one point here. Some colleges have like a strict cutoff, and these are very few. So an 8.5 plus would be able to get you into most colleges, apart from a few topmost colleges. So I don't think you have to worry too much if your CGPA is in this range, below 9 or something. And so, there are some people who have CGPA like 7.5, 7.7, but they have a good enough profile and they've got into tier 2 colleges. So if you're someone like that, you also don't have to worry. Thank you.
Right. So yeah, that's also an important point. CGPA is important, but it's not everything. If you have a good profile, say a few publications, a few good internships, CGPA will not affect you that much. What universities look for is a well-rounded profile. So they look at CGPA, your projects, your LORs. So if you have a low CGPA, it's not the end of the world. It is recommended to have a CGPA as high as possible.
All right, fine. Just one question I had missed out earlier. It was asked by one of the participants in the chat box. This question is directed towards Vishal. Vishal, the question is, why did you pick University of Florida over ASU? Could you pick this up, please?
Yeah, sure. So I had three choices to make, which were between ASU, Arizona State University, University of Florida, and University of Pittsburgh. So the first thing I saw was the course curriculum, because that is the most important thing that you have to look for. What all courses are offered, and which all books they follow, and this next thing you have to see is the professors that are there in the university and what they are working on. There will be so many professors in computer science department working in machine learning, but they'll be working on specific projects. You have to go through those projects if you are interested in uh, that topic. uh, Tailor your SOP around that professor, and I would suggest you to go to that college, because both of you will be on the same page if you're working together. And thirdly, you should also look at the university rankings, because uh, what I've heard is ultimately later on in your career, the reputation of university also comes into the picture. So that's also one of the things where University of Florida is better than Arizona State University in the domain of computer science, and especially for machine learning, where for which University of Florida is popular. And Pittsburgh is was lower down on the list, so I didn't choose that.
All right. Thanks a lot, Vishal.
Thank you.
Moving on, we would like to anything else that yeah. Before I move on, I'd like to also yeah. Anirudh, Anirudh, would there be anything else that you'd like to close off before we head to the next speaker?
Another thing that I would like to mention is that after you do apply, be prepared to wait for around 3 months or even more. This time, uh, decision announcements were very, very delayed, and the period between submission of your application and results announcements is quite difficult. You end up refreshing your email and the university portal every day. So yeah, just be prepared to wait for around that much time. Uh, don't don't stress yourself out. Now that you've finished your applications, you're done with um, uh, you've done all that you can. It's just time to chill out and wait for results.
Thank you so much, Anirudh. Moving on, we have Rahul who will be taking over the next session. Rahul?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Rahul, we can hear you.
Yeah, so as you can see, I've listed out my CGPA and rank over here. And continuing on the question of CGPA, I think for most universities, if you're over 9, you're pretty good. 8.5 is also decent. Only for specific universities like University of Michigan, I've heard that they prefer a CGPA of around over 9.2. And some universities do ask your class ranking. So if you're in the top 5, top 10 of your class, you can specify that as well. That does help. Again, more than CGPA and rank, if you're going into MS thesis or you're going into PhD, what matters more is having research oriented projects, research internships, or publications, as Anirudh had mentioned. So my area of interest was computer architecture and VLSI design, more specifically the RTL level or Verilog based design. My internships were I was a digital design intern at TI. One of my projects was designing chip to chip interconnect for the Ethernet team, and the other one was building a tutorial for the RISC-V SoC. I was a full-time intern at TI. I took a sem off and then I worked there for 8 months. And I also worked as a research intern at Vistion prior to that part-time along with my studies. You can move on to the next slide. Was I audible? You can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So, yeah. So I applied only for PhD programs as when you're applying for direct PhD, you have something called MS fallback. What does the MS fallback mean? Basically, if you've applied for PhD, they do consider you for masters as well if you're rejected for the PhD program. So I didn't apply for any master specific programs. You can see my list of admits over here. I think we can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so why did I choose to go for direct PhD? One of the reasons is I get a funded master's degree along the way. As you know, master's degree is quite expensive, and your expenses can come up to 100 to $150,000, including living expenses, depending on where you go. Another thing is getting a PhD means you can be moved on to a expedited list for getting a green card, easier way of getting citizenship. So basically, you don't have to worry about getting kicked out if you have a H1B or something. You have only a 60-day limit. Even for student visa, after 60 days of your graduation, you're not allowed to stay in the country if you've not found a job. So you avoid that headache. Another thing is you open up technical opportunities that may otherwise require more years of experience. Again, this can be countered by working in the specific company as well. So this is kind of counterproductive. And with direct PhD, you do tend to build up more connections in the academia and get to know what is the upcoming top research in the research field. So why have I gone for higher studies right after graduation? So considering the current economic scenario, I think you guys might have seen the USD to INR issue keeps increasing, and it didn't make much sense to work for 2 years in India, and the pay that you get in Indian companies is for living in India, and then you spend that in US. Didn't make much sense to me, and I thought it's better if I'm going to do a PhD to directly go now itself. I mentioned before what is MS fallback, and what I would consider disadvantages of a PhD is you need to commit for a long period of time. A PhD will take around 5 to 6 years. This is more specifically the US. It might be faster in the Europe. So, and your graduate stipend will typically be around $20,000 to $35,000. It will not compete with the corporate salaries in the US. So the corporate salaries I think is around $70,000 to $120,000 annually. So with a PhD, do not expect higher job availabilities or income compared to a master's graduate. It just opens up specific doors, and then you can get into specific research that you are interested in. It's more of a learning opportunity than job opportunities. So if you are looking specifically at just getting more jobs, I would suggest for a master's if you're comfortable with stomaching the large cost of a master's program. So another disadvantage of a PhD is you'll have to work on your research along with coursework. So in a direct PhD, you're basically expected to do the coursework of a master's student. So if you have to do 10 courses under a master's program, you would have to do the same for a direct PhD as well. And you would have to work as an RA or TA along with that and do your research as well. So that would be extra stressful. You can move on to the next screen. Uh, you can move to the next slide. Yeah, so I didn't really notice anyone ask this, so I'll answer this. What should be my approximate GRE score? So I've heard from my seniors that 320 plus is considered to be a safe score, excluding the AWA. AWA is usually not considered in the engineering side of things. It's more for business or English. So you can kind of ignore that score if you gotten a 3 out of 6 also. It does not really matter. They actually don't consider it. Another thing is you will have to keep in mind that GRE is currently being phased out of most consideration for more universities. So you'll have to focus on research side of things. GRE is not one of the what I say main goals of your admission. So don't focus too much on it. I gave maybe 1 or 2 days of preparation maximum. I think you can give 1 or 2 weeks and then get it done with as soon as possible because it is not a huge step in your application. And for direct PhD applications, what I've noticed is most PhD applications don't even take in GRE. They literally specify in their website, like if applying to MIT or Stanford, they mention that we are not going to consider your GRE scores at all. Or other universities will say if you have a bad GPA, then your GRE score can be considered as a counter for that. Like say you're trying to do a branch change, maybe that might be helpful. If your original undergrad majors is in a different program and you want to prove that you are academically capable, having a high GRE score might help you out. So your TOEFL or IELTS score actually matters more than your GRE, even though you might have heard otherwise because the GRE is again being phased out. For what should be my TOEFL score, I think what I've seen is the requirement is usually around 90 to 100, and you can find the exact score on the university websites. If you want to work as a teaching assistant, you'll have to have a speaking score of around 26 to 27. Again, you can retake the GRE and TOEFL multiple times. So ideally give it as early as possible. I would suggest you do it in your third year again or in your second year also, because you're not really going to learn anything in your college throughout your third year that's going to help you out in GRE or TOEFL. So give it out as early as possible. Do it preferably in your winter or summer vacation when you're free. So how do I get a funded master's or assistantship? So I'd say most of the top universities generally don't offer a funded master's. At least directly when you get in admission, you will not get a TA or RA offer. Generally, that's how you're offered funding. Like you're offered an assistantship and your fees are waived off. So I've seen that Georgia Tech and UT Austin as well as Purdue, what most students who get in there, they contact professors, they check for availability in RA positions, and they do tend to get one within the first semester or after the first semester, not during admission. So you can maybe contact your seniors who have got into those particular universities and ask what is the condition of assistantships? Is it being offered only to PhD students, or can I get it as a master's student as well? So why PhD in the US? So you might ask why I've applied only for US universities. The thing is, the PhD culture in the US is that you have coursework for a couple of years, 3 to 4 semesters, and then you come up with your research proposal, which is basically a PhD qualification exam. And then you do your actual PhD research work. Like you are certified as a PhD student and you can continue working on that. I figured that having 2 years more of coursework would help me out and result in a higher chance of having a PhD, completing my PhD experience. So again, this direct PhD, because you have coursework and you have 2 more years to come up with your research proposal, there is a higher chance of admission without having any prior research publications. I would not advise this, even though this is the route I followed, because I had research projects and one of my projects closely matched up with my final PhD offer. That's why I got it. Again, cutting edge research in computer architecture is done primarily in the US, as Anirudh has mentioned. That was another reason why I wanted to go there. So, how would I shortlist universities or professors I want to work with? So, if you're going for the research side of things, I would suggest you go to this website called csrankings.org, and you can sort out by the particular field, whether it's computer architecture or whether it's network security, whatever field you want to go through, you can sort through that. You can select those options and you can sort by the number of papers. So this just gives you a brief idea. Maybe you can go through the top 30 or 50 colleges that have publications in that particular field. So again, you can't just say because it has a higher number of papers in this particular field that it is better than others. After you find out that which are the universities that are publishing papers in that particular field, you can look through the particular research, go through the professors' websites, go through their research groups, and figure out what you'd like to work in, whether something you find very interesting, then contact the professor. Don't go blindly by rankings. Like you have QS rankings and all, most of that is utter nonsense. You won't find it helpful. Maybe for top four, you might know MIT, Stanford. Again, that only matters if you want to get into academia. What most people do is they go into MS thesis or PhD, and most of them don't end up as professors. They go back to working in corporate research labs. So large companies like Intel, Nvidia, AMD, they do have their own research labs. That's something you can work in with a doctorate. That's what I'm aiming at. You can move on to the next slide. Was I audible? You can move on to the next slide. Yeah. So what should I focus on if my priority is direct PhD rather than MS? So again, try to have research publications. That would be the biggest help in your application. Having a high GPA also helps. If you're worried that you cannot complete your publication, or you will not get the publication within the application time, you can have publish, you can write in your resume as ongoing publications as well. And in the application websites, you do have an option for adding on publications or ongoing publications as well. Apply for research internships. So I took a sem off and I did an 8-month internship at TI. What I would suggest now for you guys to do is, you'll find that these research internships tend to be only for the summer period. You'll not find it for the sem off period, the extra 6 months. So I'd suggest you go for a 6 months research internship abroad, or you can do just a summer research internship and then you can do another 6 months internship over here itself under a company, or you can contact our professors and they would be able to help you out. So again, the same way you shortlist universities, I would suggest you contact professors with matching interests, go through their research papers and start cold mailing them. So ideally, you can do this around 6 to 8 months before applications start. If you want to do an internship in their research group, that strongly helps your admission chances of that particular university. But then again, you'd have to contact them a year or two earlier and then make sure that you actually get a response. So this may require mailing the same guy multiple times. So if you can leave a gap of 2 days and they might respond. So what I noticed in US universities, they tend to respond less compared to Europe, I think. So you'll have to keep your mental space for that as well. And you might have to cold mail around 100 mails before you actually even get a response. So another thing is you'll have to personalize each SOP with regards to the research being done at the university. So if you have a broad idea of which field you want to get into, you might find out that there's a specific project that's targeting one of the areas that you're interested in working in. So you can mention that in your SOP and that does help your chances of admission. Again, contacting professors early means if they are really interested in your profile and you can probably ask them to have a meeting with you and then you can talk to them earlier. They might schedule an early interview before even that admission process starts and the admission becomes a formality for you. This is not really heard of in the master's applications, but I think it's quite common in the PhD area where people do tend to get admission seats reserved for them even before they get into the university, like the application starts. Another thing you can do is talk to PhD students in the same research group. Like, you're going to be working with the same research advisor for the next 5 years. It's advisable that you know how he is, like, under the purview of his students. Like, if you contact them personally, they might be able to tell you whether he's what type of research advisor is, whether he's very hands-on, what type of research advisor you are looking for, whether it matches. And they are more likely to respond than the professors themselves. So it does help to reach out to the PhD students who are working in the research group. Again, bonus points if they're NITK alumni, they're even more likely to respond to you. You can move on to the next screen. Next slide. Any questions?
Yeah, just give me a second. I'll just
Yeah.
give a few questions from the chat box. Um, all right, I have a question from my end. So I'd like to know what are the career prospects that you would generally have after you finish your PhD? The usual perception that people generally have is, once you finish a PhD, you either enter academia, which is the most probable field that people generally have. But I'm pretty sure that there are many other opportunities that you would have on a career prospectus after you finish your PhD. So could you shed some light on it?
So I'd say if you want to get into the academia, then ranking tends to matter more. Like if you're going to get in, then you'd probably want to wait, not apply right out of undergrad. If you want to work in academia, get a couple of papers published, maybe work as an intern at IISc or something, and then apply, because that will improve your chances of admission into MIT, Stanford, and the Ivy League, so on. That's where the rankings come into the picture. It matters only in the academia. It does not matter in corporate space, whether you're an MIT graduate or whether you come out of NC State or whether you come out of University of Florida. You can look at your placements. The salary is not going to differ by much, even if it differs at all. What I've seen is it does not differ. So out of PhD, the career prospects are very similar to out of masters. Another thing is, I'd say additional doors do open. Like if you're looking at Silicon Research Labs, Again, like I mentioned, at Intel, they do have specified researchers that they do hire. Like you would probably be doing the exact same type of work that you would be doing at your PhD, but only thing is you're getting the corporate pay and you're not allowed to share your research. That's the only difference. So I'd say you can, if you're looking at a PhD, what I'd say your primary career prospect, one is academia. Again, ranking matters for that. So do not do a PhD right out of undergrad if you're looking for academia. If you're looking at working at research labs, like again, I mentioned Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, this is for my particular field. You'll find research labs for your particular field as well. So they do again tend to pay higher amounts because again, if you notice the professors pay, it's also very high in the US compared to India because they are expected to work for longer hours and have cutting edge research published. So I'd say working in research labs, that would be the advantage of doing a PhD, where someone who has a master's program may not be, was passed out of a master's program may not be let into the research labs. These would be the two primary career perspectives.
All right, that's great, Rahul. We'll move on to the next speaker, and that is Siddharth Iyer. Siddharth, I'd request you to kindly take over the session.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, Siddharth, please.
Okay. So thanks, Rehan. Hi, everyone. I'm Siddharth. I'll be starting my PhD this fall at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I'll be studying power electronics. This is just a very brief summary of my background and my profile. So I think, yeah, you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, the first thing I wanted to talk about is how you go about shortlisting programs that you're going to apply to. I know people have already covered this in this session, but since everyone considers different factors while making these decisions, I thought I would share my point of view as well. So, in my opinion, these three factors are the most important things to consider: research, coursework, and costs. So research is important, especially if you're applying to a research-based degree, either a thesis-based master's or a PhD. In that case, it's the most important factor. And the way you can assess whether your research interests match with the kind of research that is being done at that university is by looking at the profiles of professors who work there. So read a few papers that have been written by professors who are working in your area at that university, and that will give you a good idea of what kind of research they do and what methods they use, what specific topics within your field they focus on. And based on that, you can decide whether you'd like to apply to that program or not. So one important thing is, ideally you should have at least 2 or 3 professors at the university who are working on topics that you find interesting. If there's only one professor you're interested in, you need to make sure that that professor is actually going to be accepting students in the coming term, because if not, then you're just going to end up wasting your application money. You might be still admitted under another professor, but if that's not someone you want to work with, then there's no point. So to find out whether a professor will be accepting students, I think a good way is to reach out to them. So yeah, Rahul was also talking about cold mailing professors. So the main purpose, I think, of that is to ensure that a particular professor will be accepting students during the coming term. And it can also be a good opportunity to speak to them and figure out, what kind of research they do in a little bit more detail, and what their lab culture and other things are like. Then, of course, you should also look at coursework. Uh, Whether you're going for a master's or a direct PhD, you will be having coursework. So I would say for research-based degrees, again, coursework is not as important as the quality of research, but it is still important. And you can find the graduate course catalog for any university on their website. So yeah, you can take a look at each university's courses and see whether they align with your interests. Then, so for PhD programs, I don't think costs are a big factor, because PhDs in the US are usually fully funded, which means you will have your tuition fee waived and you'll also be getting an assistantship on top of that. That should be enough to cover you in most cases. But if you're applying for a master's program, then costs are also an important factor, and also the availability of funding is important in the case of master students once again. So you should look at things like scholarships and assistantships. From what I've seen, fellowships are usually reserved for the domestic students. There are exceptions to that, but this is just a general trend that I've noticed. But yes, assistantships are usually open to people from all backgrounds, but they are generally given to PhD students first, and master students don't get much of a preference while they're being considered for assistantships. So find out what kind of funding is available at the university. And there are a few other factors also that you can consider, uh, which I feel are not as important as the others. Things like where the university is located, the prestige of the program. Once again, I feel that that's not important unless you want to, as Rahul was saying, unless you want to work in academia in the US, then I think prestige plays a big role. But otherwise, yeah, it doesn't matter which university you get your degree from, as long as it's a decent, reputed university. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, then I thought I would also cover the GRE and the TOEFL in some detail. So, as Vishal said earlier, the GRE has three components: the verbal section, the quant section, and the writing section. So the verbal preparation again consists of two parts. The first thing is building a good vocabulary, and the second thing is developing good strategies to solve the different kinds of questions. So for vocabulary building, you can use any of the lists that are available online from reputed companies. What I would recommend is Magoosh's list. They have around 1,000 words, which are available in the form of flashcards. So that I think helps improve retention. And GregMat's list is also great. So before I move forward, I should talk about GregMat. GregMat is an online GRE prep platform, which costs, it's the cheapest option. It costs only $5 a month, and his content is really good. So if you're preparing for the GRE, I would recommend for those 2 or 3 months when you are preparing seriously, I would recommend subscribing to GregMat Plus. So GregMat's list is also great. I also used a book by a company called Barron's. But yeah, anyways, even if you use any one of these lists, it's fine, because there is a lot of overlap between these different lists. For strategy, again, Greg Matt's videos are great. His strategies work like 99% of the time. To practice these strategies, you can use the current material from ETS, which is a company that administers the GRE, and you can also use the big book, which is a collection of some 27 or so old GRE tests. So even though the format has changed, the verbal questions are pretty similar, so you can practice those questions as well. For verbal, I would say avoid third party material, because third party companies have not yet managed to mimic the standard of ETS's questions, and they will usually give you a false idea of what verbal is actually like. For quant, you won't have anything new to learn. It's all basic concepts which you should be knowing if you're an engineering student, and you only need to practice questions to build your speed. To do that, you can use the official material once again from ETS. You can use Manhattan's 5-pound book, which is a good resource. It has questions for each topic compiled separately. Uh, GregMat Plus also has some practice questions. The hard and the extra hard questions are especially useful. And in general, I've observed that third party test prep material is okay for quant. It's not as bad as verbal. It's usually quite good. If you want some practice with trickier questions, then you can try GMAT problems as well, because GMAT quant is harder than GRE quant. For writing, once again, stick to GregMat's templates. They are a tried and tested solution. And also, if you're doing practice, then use the official list of writing prompts that has been published by ETS. So they pull all of their writing tasks on actual tests from this list. So that will give you a much better idea of the kinds of prompts you can expect than third party companies material. And for practice tests, you have the power prep tests, which are official tests from ETS, and two of them are free and the rest of them are paid. They are called power prep plus, and power prep plus is pretty expensive, so if you want to avoid that, you can use uh, mock tests from any other reputed third-party company. So by reputed, I mean people like Magoosh, Kaplan, and Princeton Review and others. Also, if I remember correctly, I think I forgot to mention it on this slide. At the end of the official GRE guide, which is a book by ETS, there is a paper-based test as well. So you can also check that out. Then coming to the TOEFL, reading and writing are much easier on the TOEFL than on the GRE. You just need to get used to the kinds of questions. Then listening is also fairly easy. It just needs a little bit more practice. The important thing in listening is to write down whatever the speaker is saying as they're speaking, because that helps you remember what they say. And speaking, in my opinion, is the hardest section on the TOEFL because of the stringent time limits. And also, you will be speaking into a computer. You won't be speaking to an actual person. So the computer will cut you off once your time is over, irrespective of whether you finished or not. So for speaking, you should get as much practice as you can, at least till you're comfortable with the different kinds of speaking questions. So once again, GregMat has videos for the TOEFL. Uh, there is also a free practice test on the ETS website. Then ETS also has a book called The Official Guide to the TOEFL. And in addition, there are two volumes of tests again from ETS. And actually, if you buy the digital versions of these two volumes, you get a desktop app with it, which kind of simulates what happens during the actual test. So that was something I found useful. If you run out of questions, if you want extra practice, especially for speaking, you can check out this YouTube channel called TST Prep. So yeah, that's and if you want to take a screenshot of this page, go ahead, because I think this is a fairly comprehensive list of materials. But yeah, I think you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, so the next thing I wanted to talk about is your SOPs. I'll just give some general advice first. So SOPs are the most irritating part of the entire application process, because each program has a different set of rules. So one university might say, okay, go ahead and write as much as you want, 2 pages, 3 pages, we don't care. And another university might say, 750 words is the hard limit. So it's kind of a pain in the ass to keep track of all of these different requirements. So what I would recommend is, as soon as your applications open up, which will be sometime in September maybe, just create your account on your application portal and go to the page where you need to upload your SOP. There you will find the SOP prompt. You might also find it on the program's website. So take a screenshot of that prompt or copy paste it to the document where you are writing your SOP, so that you always have that information in mind when you are writing it. Then, as others have said, you can use Grammarly to make sure there are no grammatical errors in your essays. But if you're applying to US universities, make sure that you set the region as US in Grammarly settings, because otherwise the spellings of certain words will be different. And that's not really much of an issue, but I think it's a nice touch when you use the spellings that the reader is familiar with. So yeah, and yeah, as I think Anirudh was saying, avoid childhood stories. Uh, Nobody expects you to have developed a serious interest in any topic within your field before your undergraduate degree started. So you don't need to demonstrate like a long-term interest in your area. You can just talk about the experiences you've had since your undergrad degree started. And this might be a personal preference, but I think it's really cheesy to include like quotes in at the beginning of your SOP, because even if you've put a lot of thought into it, they're going to assume that you googled cool engineering quotes or whatever and copy pasted the first result. So I would say avoid that because it looks disingenuous. And also like avoid using very flowery or very fancy language. Use simple words. Don't go over the top. So there's actually a whole list of things that you should avoid in your SOPs. There was a study that was done, and there was a paper that was written. It's called the Kisses of Death or something in graduate applications. So in my Gyan review, I've included a link to that paper. So once you receive that document, you can also check that out to see what else you should avoid. Then I also thought I would share the structure that I followed for my SOP. So the first thing I did was explicitly state my research interests and also how I developed an interest in these areas. Uh, and that was the first paragraph, and the subsequent paragraphs, so the second and third paragraph in my case were dedicated to specific projects or research experiences, uh, and in each of these paragraphs or for each experience you should explain the ideally you should explain the aim of that project, what methods you used, then if there were any major research, if it was a research project, then if there were any major findings, or if there were any results, that if there were any impressive results that you achieved, then state those as well. And the most important thing is, for each experience you should state what skills or knowledge you acquired by working on this project. So that's, at the end of the day, that's what they want to see in your SOP. They don't want a very heavily technical explanation. That belongs in your CV probably. Then the next paragraph, you can talk about what you want to do after you graduate with this degree. So basically your career aspirations or your plans for your future, and you can kind of link that to your motivation behind applying for this degree, because that's also an important part of the SOP, is to demonstrate that you have a solid reason why you're applying to this program at this stage in your career. Then yeah, the most important part of your SOP in my opinion is the university specific paragraph, where you demonstrate why this particular program is a good fit for you. So if you're applying to a research based degree, then you have to list out the professors that you're interested in working with, and you have to explain why you're interested in working with them. For that, what I did was I read one paper by each of the professors whom I named in my SOP in detail, and I tried to summarize the main findings or the main uh, you know outcome of that paper in 1 or 2 lines. I think that's a good way to go about it, because it not only shows that you've taken the time to do your research on those professors, it also shows that you were able to identify the crux of that paper. And yeah, after that you can also talk about courses you'll be interested in taking. And if you have space, you can you can also talk about joining clubs or professional societies or something, but I don't think that is a very important point to mention. Yeah, and in the conclusion, you can just state that this program is a good fit for you and will help you move forward in your career. That doesn't need to be a very elaborate thing. So yeah, I think you can move forward. Yeah, as part of your application, you'll also have to submit a CV or a resume. If you're applying for a PhD specifically, I would say stick to a CV, because CVs are generally used in academia rather than resumes. And technically, a CV doesn't have a page limit, but if you're applying with just an undergraduate degree, I would say it should be less than 2 pages ideally, but or 3 pages at most. So definitely try to keep it below 3 pages. And typically these are the things that are included in a CV. So you have to state your educational history, and the grade that you achieved in each of the educational institutions that you attended in your past. And so they don't really care too much about your high school marks, so your 10th standard and 12th standard results. But you can just include that information as well. But yeah, if you're running out of space, that is one of the first things you should think about removing from your CV. And you can also talk about relevant coursework that you've taken. Again, this is not too important to include in your CV, because they already have your full transcripts with them, so they can see what courses you have taken. But if there are any ongoing courses or anything that you want to talk about, then you can include that as well. You can again mention your research interest here. That kind of reiterates what you have said in your SOP. Then the most important section of your CV is the section where you describe each of your projects or your research experiences. And in your CV, keep it very technical. You don't have to explain the motivation behind the project or what you learned from it. You just have to explain it in a very matter of fact or very technical way. Then you can list your publications, if applicable, of course. And when listing publications, stick to the standard citation format that is followed in your field. And also highlight your name in the authors list, because that is pretty important to people in academia, how much you contributed to that paper. Then also list your awards and honors. So that includes things like scholarships you received, or if you have a good rank within your class, you can also include that here. Technical skills, of course, that's a standard component of any resume or CV. And then if you also have any online certifications, maybe you can list those as well. So once again, the project section is important. It should kind of complement what you've written in your SOP and in a more technical way. Yeah. So yeah, you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, this is another thing I thought I would cover. This is specific to PhD applications. If you're planning to apply for master's programs, this may not be relevant to you. So sometimes you will have interviews. This happens after you've submitted your applications and after professors at the university have had time to review your application materials. So unfortunately, there is a lot of variation when it comes to interviews. There's no standard format, and some programs conduct interviews, some programs don't. It totally depends on the professor who is interested in admitting you. So it's impossible to predict whether you will have an interview or not, or whether even if you have an interview, it's sometimes impossible to tell what it will be like. But one common thing that I've observed, so I spoke to 3 professors during the phase after I submitted my applications, and in all 3 meetings, I had to prepare a presentation about a topic of my choice. And what I chose to do was speak about one of my research projects. So if you're also talking about one of your research projects, then pick the one that has the best results or is the most impressive project, the one that you're the most proud of, or yeah, the one that is most relevant to uh, that professor's interests. And yeah, this presentation can be very technical. You can get into the technical details and you can use whatever jargon you want to, because anyways you're speaking to a professor, not a lay person. Then you may also have technical questions. They may or may not be related to the topic that you presented. So you should be prepared to answer any questions related to the topic that you choose to speak about. In addition to that, the professor might also ask his or her own questions that are unrelated to your presentation, and in that case they will most probably be based on fundamental concepts. There won't be any questions based on like advanced topics or anything. They're just trying to check whether you have a firm grasp of the basic concepts. That's what at least that's what happened in my case. So yeah, be mentally prepared for that as well. uh, then yeah, just one standard piece of advice which is applicable to any interview. uh, think out loud and explain your reasoning. Don't just give the person your final answer. Explain your approach and your reasoning, because that's ultimately what they're interested in. They're not so interested in whether or not you got the final answer right. They're more interested in whether or not you took the right approach. So I think that's an important thing. And yeah, I think you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about today. So if anyone has any questions, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Siddharth. Siddharth, could you kindly give us a few pieces of advice from your end? Kindly make it very short as we would need to speed up the session.
Okay, advice on what specifically?
Any final concluding statements that you'd
Okay,
like to
right.
take away from your talk?
Yeah, I didn't include a slide about LORs because I think that's one of the components that is completely not in your control. So I just want to say, whoever you are choosing as your recommenders, make sure they know you well. Ideally, you should have worked with them, or you should have taken at least two courses under them. And also another thing is, yeah, make sure you let them know in early on, so maybe in July or August itself, that you are planning to apply for graduate studies, and make sure that you request them to support your application with their recommendation early on. And later on, send out the requests for LORs to them as soon as possible. But give them, in the worst case, give them at least 2 or 3 weeks before the application is due to actually submit your LOR. Yeah, so I didn't have a separate slide about that, so I thought I'd just mention that.
All right, thank you so much, Siddharth. Moving ahead, there is a follow-up question for Rahul, which was our previous speaker. Rahul, the question is that what is the strategic importance of publications when you apply for your master's or for your PhD? If you could kindly shed some light on this.
So if you're applying for an MS thesis or research-based program or a PhD, I'd say having a publication that is relevant to your prior whatever field you're applying for, it indicates that you're capable of doing research work in that particular field. So it just indicates to your professor or the admissions committee that you have done previous research work and you're willing to continue along the same lines. That's the main importance of the publication. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, Rahul, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next speaker for the session. We now have Shreyas Rao, who will be explaining his journey and how he got into Columbia. Shreyas, please take over.
Hi, could you just confirm if I'm audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so hey everyone, I'm Shreyas. I graduated from the Department of Electrical and Electronics Engineering this year, and I'll be joining the MSEE program at Columbia University. So, regarding my profile, I had a GPA of 8.53 during at the time of my applications. The my areas of interest are machine learning and signal processing, and at the time of my application, I had two research internships. I had interned at Spectrum Lab, IIC Bangalore for 2 summers, the one after second year and the one after my third year. And I had also worked remotely with a professor from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. So can we move to the next slide? Okay, so here's my university shortlist. I applied to 10 of them. All of them were in the field of EC itself with a specialization of signal processing and machine learning. So I think Anirudh mentioned about a 3-4-3 split while applying for to university. So in my case, I actually went for a slightly different split, which was 2-7+1. The first two on this list were ambitious, seven of them were moderate, and the last one was safe universities. It's not the most ideal thing to do, but I just decided to go ahead and give it a gamble, hoping that I can get into more number of moderate ones if possible. So you can go to the next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, so I was admitted to Columbia University, UPenn, Georgia Tech, U Washington, and University of Southern California. And Columbia University and UPenn were my top choices. I eventually went ahead with Columbia. It was actually a tough choice between Columbia and UPenn because so UPenn, I think some of you from EC and Triple would already know it's like they have the best labs for robotics. So there's a lot of scope for ML, and Columbia also has a really great ML department in CS. So as a triple E, with along with our triple E masters, we do get to take a lot of courses from the CS department as well. So in terms of coursework, both UPenn and Columbia were a great choice, and even the fee structure was similar. The reason I went ahead with Columbia is because it's located in the heart of New York, and there are a lot of opportunities for internships and job applications there as well, compared to Philadelphia, which is the location of UPenn. So yeah, that's about it. Can you go to the next slide? So program I chose and why I already explained. So why I decided to go for grad school. So the main reason being I wanted to delve deeper into the subject of interest, which of my interest, which is machine learning and signal processing. So I've always been a bit of a math geek. That's why I decided to take up engineering in the first place. And I started learning machine learning in my first year, and I've done some projects. And naturally, being an electrical undergrad, I developed an interest for signal processing as well, and there's a lot of correlation between the two subjects. So that's why after my second year, I had done an internship at ISC, as I mentioned. So that's when I had decided that this is probably something I would want to go ahead with. So that's why decided to like maximize my efforts into building a profile for MS. And the second reason being the better opportunities after an MS compared to just a bachelor's degree. So can you move to the next slide? So here's my preparation and application timeline. So as I mentioned before, I had interned at Spectrum Lab, ISC Bangalore, during the summer of 2021 and 2022, which was after my second year and after my third year. And during my sixth and seventh semester, I was working remotely with a professor in UIUC. So in May 2022 is when I started beginning my preparation for all the applications. The first thing I went ahead with was my GRE and TOEFL prep. Then in July, I wrote GRE and TOEFL. And in August, I began shortlisting universities and started preparing my SOP. In September, I started requesting my professors for LORs, and in December and Jan, I submitted all my applications. Next slide, please. So here are the application requirements for most universities. So transcripts, of course. Then you have the statement of purpose. Most applications require three LORs. Some of them have a minimum of two, and they have a third one optional. But most of them have it mandatory to submit three LORs. Then, of course, you have your CV and TOEFL and GRE scores. GRE is being made optional in most places, and only out of the 10 places I applied to, I think only three or four of them had it mandatory. So I submitted my scores only to those. So you can go with the next slide, please. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is CGPA. So I think this is something that's talked about the most when it comes to MS applications. So my GPA was 8.53 after sixth semester. Um, in my opinion, so with a GPA of 8.5, I got into two of the two prestigious schools, and but I also got rejected by a lot of the schools I wanted to go ahead with, like, so for example, Michigan and Georgia Tech and UIUC, and I got into Columbia and UPenn. So in my opinion, a 9+ GPA would be safe, but if you have a GPA between 8 and 9, it's still competitive. So some universities have a more holistic approach while evaluating your profile. So the ones that rejected me were more GPA centric, especially UIUC, Michigan, and UCLA. So the way you compensate for a mediocre GPA is obviously through your work experience or research experience, a good SOP and LORs. And the main thing which would like boost your profile would be a publication. So let's say you are doing an internship in your second year and you had a prospect of publishing a paper at a top conference. For example, when it comes to signal processing and machine learning, the top conferences are ICASP, ISIP, CVPR, and I think there are many more actually. So if there's a prospect of publishing a paper in one of these conferences, it'll definitely boost your profile. So it can compensate for lower GPA as well. So a 9+ GPA is not, like, it's only the first thing. It's the first thing they would expect in a profile, but it's definitely not the only thing they expect in a profile. So yeah, as I said, you can compensate. You can always compensate for a mediocre GPA with sufficient work experience and publications, like I did. So you can go to the next slide, please. So yeah, coming to the statement of purpose, I started preparing my SOP 3 months before my application deadlines, as I mentioned, and the most universities have a limit of 2 pages or 1,000 words. So the most important thing in your SOP is to display a clear intent of pursuing the field of your interest. So as I already mentioned before, I've always been a math geek. So I'd mentioned that in the beginning of my SOP, and that's what got me into learning machine learning and signal processing in my first and second year. So later on, I went for an internship after my second year. So there was a smooth transition between my interests and what I did to pursue my interests. So when you're after the brief introduction, you should probably dedicate like two or three paragraphs towards your experiences and your finally a major project. So, and there has to be a clear link between one experience to the next experience. Let's say you're working on signal processing during your second year internship. There has to be a clear explanation based on what you learned from it and what motivated you to go for another internship after that, and how that led to your decision to pursue grad school. So yeah, that's about describing your experiences. So during your application is basically an interplay between your CV, SOP, and your LORs. So your CV should have more of the technical jargon, and your SOP should have more of the experience, more of what you learned from your experiences. So don't I would say not to include a lot of technical detail in your SOP, but there obviously has to be some technical detail, but it should be more about what you learned from your projects rather than the technical detail in your projects. And also make sure that like make sure your experiences that you mention in your SOP are validated in your LORs. So when you start preparing your SOP, have a hunch about what your recommenders might write in your LOR. So based on that, you can try to make sure that all the important points which describe your internship experience are covered in your SOP. So, as the previous speakers mentioned, don't include generic points like childhood stories. A childhood story can never be a motivation to pursue grad school. It can only be at best it can be a motivation to pursue a major during your undergrad. A motivation to pursue grad school can only come from your undergrad, not before that. So, and yeah, more importantly, I would say, so when you start preparing your SOP for a particular university, go look check the university websites and find at least two courses and two professors who work at the university. So mention these two courses which you would like to take in one of the paragraphs. So after your experiences, you'll have to dedicate one huge paragraph about what you want to do at during your masters at that particular university. So apart from the courses, I would recommend you go to the websites and find at least two professors you want to work with, and and go through their research papers on Google Scholar or IEEE or any other website, and describe how their research relates to your your project and internship experience. That could be a crucial factor in determining your admit by the admission committee. So yeah, that's about describing your goal, and also describe give a picture about your long-term goals the paragraph where you describe your time at the university. And lastly, I would say use, as Anirudh also already mentioned, use Grammarly to avoid errors and improve sentence formation. So that's about the statement of purpose. You can, yeah. So next up is the records. So as I already mentioned, most applications require three records. So when it comes to records, there are two types of professors, all right? So the first type writes the record for the student on his own. The second type asks you to give him a draft, and he edits the same, and he just submits it in the portal. So I'd say as much as possible, uh, try to make sure that the professor writes the LOR on his own. Like the committee has been doing this for a lot of years. They know when a student has written the record on his own and when the professor has written it. So as much as possible, try to make sure your professor writes the record from scratch on his own. But unless you have no other option, try to do that. But if he's adamant about giving him a draft and editing the same, there's really nothing much you can do about it. So you'll have to go with that itself. But at least ensure that one of the LORs which is submitting to the university is genuine, basically written by the prof from scratch, so that you have sufficient, like, so that the quality of the LOR is good enough. So also, I mean, obviously, you should make sure that you've done sufficient project work under the professor before you ask them for an LOR. So you can't just ask any professor in the university from college at NITK from your department for a reco. If he hasn't taken any of your courses or you haven't done any mini project, he just won't have any content to write in your LOR. So that's a classic case of when profs submit a very generic LOR, and when it adds no value to your application. It will only satisfy the requirements, but it won't add much value to the strength of your application. So that's about LORs. We can move to the next slide. So CV shouldn't be more than pages. There are a lot of latex templates for building your CV, uh, preparing a CV basically. And the main points, as you may already know, are CGPA, your internships. As I mentioned before, uh, try to include most of the technical stuff in your CV and most of the learnings from your projects in your SOP. So you could also include your extracurriculars. If you have extracurriculars, you could also include it to fill up space if you have space in the end. And yeah, so that's about the CV. That basically include the more technical stuff rather than the learnings from your project. So that said, I think there's already enough said about GRE and TOEFL, so I won't be covering that. Lastly, if there are any questions, you can let me know.
Yeah, Shreya. So there is a follow-up question.
Okay.
Because your domain is mostly in the field of SPML, which is signal processing and machine learning, the usual dilemma that comes is because you're dealing with machine learning over here, should I go for machine learning in an EC context or should I go it on a CS context?
Okay. So to start answering that, see, machine learning has a lot of applications in signal processing. So when you're building a profile, it's very subjective actually. So if you're working at a CS lab, it will be more oriented towards the ML side. If you're working at a lab in the EEE department or the EC department, it would be more into the signal processing side. So the internship I did after second year was in the EEE department of IIC. So my project was like an intersection between signal processing, image processing, and machine learning. So it had both components. It had the deep learning component which is usually done at most CF labs, but it also had the signal processing component in it. So it's totally based on your interest. So if you're switching fields to CS, I would say try to do projects more on the ML side. But if you want to apply to programs in EC and specialize in ML, it doesn't really matter much. You could either go with pure ML, or you could do a project in signal processing with an intersection with machine learning as well. So that's about it. If you're working with a prof in the EC department, basically you'll have a lot of applications in signal processing. Their research is more focused on the signal processing side rather than the ML side. So yeah, see, it's based on your interest.
Yeah, and one more question that and one more point which I'd like to reiterate once again. You mentioned very vividly that if you were to compensate your CGPA, emphasize more on publications because they are a very good factor to
Yeah.
compensate your academic transcripts. But would you say that that statement is applicable for every college that you apply, or is it that each college have their own sets of priorities, as in they prioritize CGPA and publications, or is there anything like that that you'd like to tell?
Okay, so in my case, as I mentioned, I had CGPA of 8.53, and I had one publication which was under review. So it wasn't accepted yet. Although it was on the top conference, it wasn't accepted during the time of application. It was under review. So had it been accepted, that would have boosted my chances in like a lot of the places I applied to. So if the it depends on the conference basically. A local conference or a district level conference won't add much value to your application. If you have an accepted publication in a top tier conference or a journal, that will definitely boost your chances, and that holds for all colleges, even the ones like the ambitious ones in my case, like UIUC and UCLA. I've seen a lot of profiles from the previous year's grad school GAN documents in which people had a sub 9 CGPA in the range of maybe 8 to 8.5 or 8.5 to 9, but they had a publication in a top tier journal or a conference, and that's the reason they got admits from a lot of the top universities. So a top tier conference or a journal paper will definitely boost your chances in all the places you apply to. But when it comes to publications which are still under review, that might like make the admission committee a bit skeptical whether about your potential. But if it's under review, I would recommend that you ask your recommenders to mention that in your LOR. So when you publish a paper under prof, so your prof almost always knows the chances of paper being accepted. So your prof has been working in academia for like maybe 10 plus years or 20 plus years. He'll almost always have an idea of how good the quality of your paper is and what are the chances of being accepted. So yeah, that's about it. If your publication is accepted at a top tier conference or a journal, it'll definitely boost your chances.
All right. Thank you so much, Shreyas. We'll finally move on to the last speaker for today's day one session, and that will be Aditya Raghu. Aditya will be pursuing his MSc in robotics. We'll have a short video of him telling about his journey into the University of Bristol. So, yeah.
Hi guys, this is Aditya, and I'm here to talk about how I got into Bristol for my master's in robotics, and how what the process is to get into the universities, and who helped me go through all the process applications and stuff, and what made me choose the career. So I'll keep it short, as short as possible. So I consulted an educational consultant a firm, and they helped me with the whole process. Like, I had a meeting with them, and they told me to choose my career, which I had to I had to go through around 5.
I think it's not loading.
Hi guys. Yeah. So through these consultants, they help me narrow down my choices based on my portfolio, according to what I've done in on my resume. So I had applied to UK and US, and for US, what you need is IELTS and GRE, and UK you only need IELTS, along with the SOPs and the
Good,
personal
good.
statements and the recommendation letters. These are the only two differences between US and UK. At the time,
Hey, हम क्या must do
the
today,
consultant
guys?
people told me that the job opportunity in both US and UK were fairly similar. But towards the end of my application
McDonald's.
procedure, UK had a little more advantage over getting job over US. That's why I had to stick with Europe
हम लोग कैफे
as
जाएंगे
my
यार इस
final
पर बस
choice. So
जाएंगे ना
yeah, I applied to 5 colleges in US and 5 colleges
मिस
in
शेड्यूल ना पड़े
UK. It's always good to keep a safe choice, like two good choices, two mediocre choices, and one
ये
safe choice in case you don't
ये
get into
हमने
your
ये ड्राइव
top institutions.
ये क्या मग में waffle
So
डाला है भाई इसको
I
खा रहा
went
है
after I concluded that I wanted to do robotics.
ये क्या
I
फूका
had
है भाई
to sorry how I reached the conclusion that I had to get
हाँ यार सच में
I chose Bristol over the other colleges I got into is that Bristol's portfolio on the website, they said that they're the fifth greatest UK institution for leading research, and they have a huge robotics laboratory that's continuously innovating and publishing research papers, and they are very actively in the engineering and technology sector. So that really caught my eye, and yeah, and I think they're the 60th in the world college ranking, which also helped me choose Bristol as my choice. Apart from Bristol, I applied to Leeds, Bath, Queen Mary University of London, and Imperial College London was my top, my like ambitious choice, but I unfortunately did not get into it. The rest of, and Cardiff University. I got into the rest four and Bristol, but I didn't get into Imperial. Uh, as per the procedure, so if you go with the consultant people, there are a lot of information that you have to backtrack and keep track of due dates and stuff. So if you feel like you can't really keep up with all the due dates and all the application procedure and all the headache, I suggest you go with a consultant people, and they'll help you all the way through it. Since I applied to 10 institutions, I thought it'd be pretty hard for me to keep track of how much and what all I have to do and when all I have to do. It'll be easier to like note down the important dates and have it in front of you so that you don't miss any of the important dates. But yeah, apart from that, my second last term of my final year, I was busy preparing for the IELTS, GRE, and writing my SOPs and personal statements. Usually, each university during the application procedure, they have a guideline for your personal statement and statement of purpose, like what they expect you to mention in the statement of purpose. And usually, the word limit is, I think, 1,000 words or like one page max. And I suggest you try to grab their attention onto what exactly caught your eye about the university, and what exactly made you choose the career you are trying to convince them to choose you over the other people. Uh, then So as for US colleges, as per the choices they gave me, I had to shortlist some of them. I did the GRE exam, and I got a score of 315, which is not too great, but is not bad either. So I could apply to some of the good institutions, which was recommended for robotics. 315. I got 150 in English only because my English is a little weaker than my math. So. Uh, in case you're trying to prepare GRE, I suggest you focus more on English, because the whole procedure of writing the English exam is a little boring, and you have to read through a lot of political, historical, scientific paragraphs and find answers from the paragraph. And the options they give all seem the same to you. So unless you have a lot of practice, you won't be able to crack it. And there's around 1200 words of vocabulary that you can't really remember because it's not day-to-day usage vocabulary. So if you're planning to write GRE, I suggest you at least have 5 to 6 months of practice so that you can get a good score. And IELTS is pretty basic. It's just writing, listening, reading, and speaking. If you can converse in English pretty well, it should be a cakewalk. And it took me like 1.5 months of practice. You can find uh, plenty of papers online to practice with. Yeah, so if I started my GRE preparation in the December of 20 2021, and I wrote my exam in the May of the next year. And I had my colleges shortlisted by the summer vacation end. That's basically around July, August. I had my choices ready, and September the consultant people helped me open my uh, account in each of the colleges I wanted to apply to. And in by October, November, I had to get my transcripts ready and my grade cards ready from the NITK side. And I had my SOPs and POS being written by myself uh, simultaneously. I had my cousin help me out in like pointing out the mistakes, and even the consultant people helped me to correct some of the lines, or like some of the lines if they were repeated, or like if there was any unimportant information in my SOP, they helped me just filter it out. And for early app, it's before Christmas. The application deadlines are before Christmas. And yeah, I applied to most of my colleges before Christmas so that I get my choices by in the next 5 months basically. I got my offer from Bristol, and the deadline was in May. So I was actually waiting for a couple of the US colleges I applied to, and I had gotten into UC Riverside, Northeastern, Northeastern, Illinois Institute of Technology, and University of Cincinnati. But according to my research, my personal research, and the world ranking, and like how Bristol had a world leading robotics laboratory, and like it's good for research and stuff, I just narrowed down my choice to Bristol. And yeah, that's how I came to my choice as Bristol. Thank you for listening, guys.
All right. And with that, we finally come to the concluding of this session. We would like to have if there are any questions, we can take that over up. I don't see anyone over here. Uh, okay. Yeah. So, as we conclude the session, I'd like to sincerely thank everyone who had taken the time to listen to us. day one OLT session. Special mention to ACM team for handling the technical aspects of the work, and finally to all the speakers for sharing their experiences and for giving their insights as to the journey that they had taken to secure the admits that they intended to apply. And with that, we finally come to the end of day one. Tomorrow, we'll be having the day two session where we'll be having the core speakers coming in and sharing their experiences. And then we'll also be following up with the business panel as well, which will be the first time that we would have in this year's OLT session. And with that, we bid adieu and a memorable evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.